Welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks. I'm so thrilled you can join us today. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. We're going to be talking with a group of end-of-life doulas that do training and support for people dealing with dementia as well. So I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I do want to remind people to go ahead and check out alzheimersspeaks.com. There you'll find a ton of free educational resources. Download, listen, watch, pass them on. That's what they're there for. You can also access our book, Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care, which is a great children's book, but really it's a wonderful book for all ages and stages of life. You can also access on our free educational resource page a dementia map, which is our global resource directory, or you can just go directly to dementiamap.com. I also want to invite you to a couple of events that I'm doing. One is on October 10th. At Artist Senior Living in Woodbury, Minnesota. I'm going to be doing actually a program called Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care. It's a free event sponsored by Artist Senior Living, and you can RSVP at 651-439-2840. And then on September 28th and 29th, I will be participating in the Geriatric Care Summit for 2023. And you can just Google Geriatric Care Summit 2023 and you'll find information. I will actually be doing the keynote, which is called Recalibrating Care to Retain and Secure Staff and Families. So I hope you can join us on that. So let's go ahead and introduce you to our panel. Well, ladies, I am so excited to have you with us. I just think what you do, the importance of doulas in the world is so exceptionally important, and so many people don't know what a doula is. And so I'm thrilled that we're going to be talking about this and letting people know that the support that is out there. But before we get into a line of questioning, I'm just going to have everybody introduce themselves. And so, Kathy, I'm going to let you go first.
Thank you, Lori. I'm Kathy Bates. I am a social worker, a geriatric mental health specialist, and an end-of-life doula and educator. I've been in the healthcare field for over 40 years in quite a variety of settings, including skilled nursing and a private counseling and long-term psych. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Colleen, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks, Lori. My name is Colleen Hewes, and I have been a registered nurse for over 40 years with specialties in geriatrics and psychiatric mental health. I've worked on hospice team and an ICU, geriatrics ICU, and I'm certified as an end-of-life doula and a conscious dying educator.
Right. Thank you. And Kathleen.
Thank you. I'm Kathleen Putnam. I am a grief coach, end-of-life doula, registered dietitian that specializes in trauma and nutrition and self-care, and am thrilled that I'm also a trainer with the Gentle Passage Doula Collective.
Great. Thank you. And Bonnie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bonnie Blachly, and I am also a registered nurse, and I've worked most of my career in long-term care. I spent the last 10 or 12 years teaching at the University of Washington School of Nursing. I'm a certified end-of-life doula as well, and one of the founding members of Gentle Passage Doula Collective.
And Bonnie, do you want to give a plug for Maureen, who wasn't able to make it due to just medical procedure?
Oh, sure. Maureen Curis is one of our other nurses who is a founding member as well. She has a wonderful experience working as a hospice nurse in the past. She worked in oncology, and she focuses her work right now. She has her own company called Radiant Morning, and she focuses on advanced care planning. And she's a wonderful connector out in the community.
Fantastic. I wanted to make sure that we covered her as well because she's been so helpful at pulling us all together, along with, I'll give a plug for Pat Sylvia too, who is just a dear friend to all of us. So connections are so important, and it's amazing who you get to meet through those conversations. So I always start my show asking every one of my guests if they've been personally touched by dementia in their own family or circle of friends. And Kathy, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I was a young mother when my grandmother had a very psychotic dementia, Alzheimer's. And in fact, she was living in San Francisco. And some of the things that the family had to deal with is, can you imagine in San Francisco running down a set of stairs and being naked? So the family really had to deal with a lot of challenges in that. And then she ended up living in a skilled nursing facility at the end of her life. What was really rare about what my mother and grandmother experienced is my grandmother was not very demonstrative and really never said, I love you to my mother. And in her last day of her life with full-blown dementia, she was able to turn and tell my mother, I love you, Gloria. It was pretty impactful.
Wow, it is amazing. I've had stories like that from people too, where it's just the tide's turning and they're going to make a last change and kind of get out of the box that they grew up in. And those are such beautiful, beautiful moments. So thank you for sharing that. Colleen, how about you? Have you been personally touched by dementia?
Recently, actually, with a friend who has been diagnosed with early on stage dementia. She started having difficulties remembering her appointments and being organized. She's having some trouble with organization. And I've known her for years, and her partner. And you look back on the times, this is a very, very active community person who has helped so many other organizations. And this is a big thing with her, being organized. And so now she's going through that fear of what it's going to be like down the road.
Yeah, that fear and loss of who you've always been, and how people, like you said, how people perceived you, what they expect out of you. And I think we're our own worst critics when it comes to that. So many, so often people are much more compassionate than we give them credit for, because we have that inner critic going on in our own head, beating ourselves up. So thanks for sharing. Kathleen, how about you?
Yeah, I had a grandmother who suffered from dementia, but I was quite young. But it impressed upon me, right? Because I remember things that were said and how she was treated, and then the stories that followed, and especially a lot of fear of safety with the kids around. And so that was probably the closest that I've come. But then professionally, my first, job as a dietitian was in long-term care. My office was on the floor that was memory care. And I remember having to ask for support and being really worried about different behaviors, and got a really quick education actually from yours truly, Bonnie here. We worked together there, and then just watching, I was in my early 20s. I was very green at everything, right? And I remember it became my favorite place to go. And so it was like, my resistance and fear, and then just learning more and more about it. And then now more recently is it in my nutrition practice and in grief. It's encompassed a lot of my work with people, whether it be the fear of developing some form of dementia because of lineage or what their parents are going through or their siblings are going through, and what can they do now? And then also helping people who have early stage, how can I manage with my self-care and organizational skills?
Wonderful. And I think one of the best things people can do is stay connected socially when it comes to this. And there's some great groups like Dementia Action Alliance, where that group is, and same with Dementia Minds, they're primarily run by people with dementia. They do a lot of speaking and training, they facilitate groups, they make friends all around the world. And what's so interesting is most of them, when I talk with them, say, I've never felt this purposeful in my whole life. Now that I have dementia, it's like they say it feels kind of backwards because it's not what you would expect. But once they get through that kind of grief process, they really feel at home and like they're making a difference. And I think that's so important for all of us. So thank you for sharing that. Bonnie, how about you? Have you been touched by dementia in your family or circle of friends?
Yes, I have. Actually with my father, who was 93 when he died, but and he was perfectly alert, oriented, and doing everything normally until he had a stroke. And he suddenly one day he was clear, and the next day he was totally confused, and he had stroke-related dementia. And that I think was really difficult because it's like you have to change your whole mindset and thinking so quickly and so fast. But I think not only with my father, but I think going back to my career and when I first started to work on what we called a cognitively impaired unit, that's when I really got exposed to all different kinds of dementia, and I could see how it affected families, children, grandchildren, and how it progressed with our clients, and everybody was so different. And so I started that unit, working on that unit when it was a hard hat area, and we didn't have any patients yet. And what was really interesting is that we had this idea of how we were going to program the unit, but nobody could really articulate what that programming was. And so we had the great fortune, I think, of really identifying and creating a program that would support and sustain not only the residents who lived with us, but also with their families and friends. So that was very exciting to me. And it's one of the reasons why I still am really interested in working with families and their loved ones through end-of-life doula work as well.
Well, I love that you mentioned with your programming in terms of supporting the person diagnosed as well as their families. I'm doing a program for a geriatric conference, and what I'm talking about is recalibrating kind of senior care. And part of it is getting back to the basics of actually caring for people and not just being so budget and bottom line oriented and, so heavily task managed. And, we've kind of blown past those relationships, but that's one of the beauties, I think, in the work that all of you do. But I think the public is really starting to demand, hey, you're taking care of my loved one, but we need help too. As a family, we want to be part of this team, not just come to a quarterly meeting, but we want to be active and know how we can do better and how we can process things. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to ask each of you different questions, but initially, because when you introduced yourselves, you all have different titles and certifications, and my audience probably doesn't have a clue, and I don't have a clue on some of them either. Of what they actually mean. So I'm going to first, and I'm going to start with you, Bonnie. If you can, again, say your titles and then explain kind of what those are.
Okay, sure. Let's see, I think the initials after my name. So I have a master's in nursing, I started out as a registered nurse. I got a bachelor's in nursing, then a master's. I got certified as an end-of-life doula. So you'll see CEOLD. That means certified end-of-life doula. I don't know that there was anything else. Was there anything else in there that you saw that you wanted me to explain?
Nope, I think that's it for you. So that's good.
Okay.
Why don't we talk about, end of life doula training and support, and how can that really help somebody diagnosed and their family members, Bonnie?
Great. Yeah, it's a great question. Some of our students specifically want to work with clients that have a diagnosis of dementia. But in reality, we know that many people, especially older people, when they're coming to the end of their life, may have some sort of or some level of dementia as part of their MO, so to speak. And so our training provides the basics needed to develop a successful working relationship, including resources and tools they can use when they're working with a client and their family. And then for our students, we provide ongoing education through monthly webinars and coaching sessions. And this training helps our students be less fearful, gain confidence, and practice techniques that will help them work with dementia. So training topics that we cover are based on what our students tell us they need when they are working or anticipating working with a client. And so many challenges can arise on that journey towards end of life under the best of circumstances. So being able to take advantage of ongoing mentoring goes a long way to support the doula, the client, and the family, as they are the ones who are present and witness the ongoing changes associated with the disease. So we focus on things like listening skills, ways to communicate when words don't matter anymore, and how to listen and be respectful. So many times I see people thinking that just because someone has dementia, that they treat them like a child. And these are not children. These are adults with an issue, and we have to treat them that way. So we want them to be able to identify where their clients are in their dementia, and then be able to tailor a program that will sustain them at their current level of function, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, as long as possible. So I think it's important to find out what people liked, what they disliked when they did not have dementia, because then we can take those things that were important to them and we can modify them based on where they are in their dementia when we get involved. So we provide a lot of training based on the needs of our doula community and the clients they serve that have dementia.
So you had mentioned that with your training, you kind of go where the students request. Are there some like hot topic, buttons that, they all come in and go, I don't know what to do here or here or here?
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, I do a bunch of training out in the community too. And I think one of the biggest one for me is how to enter the reality of the person with dementia, and so, and I've always used that term that we have to enter their reality, because in the past, when I first started in my career, we were doing reality orientation. Well, that does not work, and we know it doesn't work. So getting into validation and how do we validate where people are and how they feel is really important. And so I think that's a big one. I'm getting ready to do one on marriage and intimacy, and how that can be affected by someone with dementia. And just because a person has dementia doesn't mean that they still don't enjoy intimacy. So we're going to have a talk about that. And the other one is too that I get a lot of questions on is, how do you take away the car keys when they shouldn't be driving anymore? So again, we get these common themes, and these are things then that will create training around. And there's tons of them out there.
So one of the preconceptions might be from some of our audience listeners is, oh, end of life. I didn't think they'd be dealing with car keys at all anymore. So like when does a doula get involved? At what stage? Is there a right or wrong?
I don't think there's a right or wrong stage. And I think really one of the challenges with taking away the car keys is going to be different over time, because cars don't start with car keys anymore. So I think we're going to be looking at a different topic, but it's really about safety, and how do we create this safe environment for our dementia residents to live in, because I think more and more we're going to see dementia residents being taken care of at home, not out in facilities. I mean, I think the memory care facilities are always going to be a need for them, but when people are in the beginning stages, they're managed at home, and this is where those kinds of topics come up.
Interesting. Well, and even with the car keys too, you can take them away, but that doesn't mean later on down in the disease, they won't go looking for them, even though they've accepted they're not driving it anymore.
Exactly.
This is a disease where there are no rules, and lots of curvy lines out there. So wonderful to know. So somebody could actually call you upon diagnosis and just say, is this appropriate for us to be meeting? Tell me more about how you can serve our family in this process.
Yeah, I just had one more thing to that, because it is really important. This is a disease that lasts for a long time. And even though somebody might not be terminal at the moment, I do get involved with people with dementia early on, just to help them through the little crises that help along the way, to help them anticipate them versus having to be reactive. So, it's hard to function in a reactive mode all the time. So if we can help people look down the road at what some likely scenarios are. And I'm finding that consumers of my service particularly, and I think all of us are finding that consumers are more educated in what they're looking for. And so we want to be able to meet those needs and help them look at the what ifs.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if you hook up early on, it makes the end of life, the very end, much easier, because you have this relationship built and people know one another. Kathleen, I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to have you go ahead and first kind of talk about your certifications and things that you have.
Sure, thank you. So I have a master's in nutrition science, and I'm also adjunct faculty in higher education, teaching nutrition science and human development, and also supervising and mentoring grad students intermittently there. And then there is the certification as a grief coach and end of life, which really is like a life coach training, 148 hours of certification that really is focused on end of life and grief. And then I too have this certification as an end of life doula.
Okay, great. Well, for you, I'm wondering, what's the difference between other support groups and working with doula trainers? There's so many options out there, and yet most of us don't even know the options exist, because you don't know what you don't know. But then as you start, digging out there, it gets confusing.
Does get confusing. And what I want to say about that is that in my heart, and really our intention with our training, is to really fill in the gaps that we have seen personally and professionally not being met because of so many circumstances, the overwhelm in the healthcare system, the limited access to resources, et cetera. So it's really been a calling around that. And so the end of life training really creates a platform to learn and grow and connect and feel empowered as well as supported. And really the basis is having a place to come and learn how to be self-compassionate. You talked about that inner critic. And the foundations in self-compassion, evidence-based theory is really that we're in a human body, which is imperfect, and so is everybody else. So you're not alone. And to really start to learn and cultivate a way of approaching that with kindness and not that inner critic, because that just adds to suffering. And so you're going to be amongst a community that has that intention, that's very intentional and mindful. And that we also, in our training, and it is training, which means the only way that we learn is that we repeat these skills and we integrate them, and we take for us first what works for us, so that we can be not in that reactive mode, but really allow ourselves to practice that integration, so that we can make space for whatever is coming up for me to be sitting alongside, whether it be my loved one as a caregiver, or maybe it's me and my fear of death and dying, or maybe it's me really cultivating more and more skills to be able to bring this to what I'm already doing. And so making sure that we also have a place where there's not just one of us that's carrying this as a trainer in training, but that we have a variety of experience and backgrounds, as you're going to hear. And so that when learning, we want to find that safe person that we can relate to, that person that we can draw resources from. And really, I'm most passionate about the skills around coaching. It feels the most natural to me to be able to be in a place where we can make a space for the truth to come to the surface. Because one of the things around the difficulty of moving through grief and accessing support and making that phone call is really moving through what it's going to take to accept that this is my reality. And so with coaching, it's moving into this place of curiosity instead of judgment. It is really helping do one thing at a time and deal with the overwhelm, just to take one new step, so that we can cultivate a way of being with one another that fosters openness and allowing, when we shut down, when we're resistant, but not making emotions good or bad, but really finding a way through, whether it be in rituals or in regular community connection, or through ongoing meetings of education, or really listening to the experience of someone else, so that we can really collaborate and empower one another and tap into our inner resources, and also be able to share resources for one another, so that we really then start moving this paradigm that we're experiencing, where we're independent and we're alone, and that the answer is always medical, and that can really potentially, for a lot of people, really feel isolating and also stigmatizing, and reinforce, if I don't have self-compassion, a lot of inner critic, that this is my fault somehow. And so the training really that we offer is a basic foundational training to get started about normalizing end-of-life conversations, and really bringing that discussion as early as possible, and have that courage to talk about the things that feel scary and sad, and to really also work through whatever comes up through these practices of that unfinished business, so that I can better relate and offer presence as a caregiver, or be there for myself, so that we really help work through that grief and provide safety for everybody that we're working with. So it's what's foundational is it's educational, and some of us really are comfortable in education, right? If we have a skill and we educate, and this cognitive, that's how we make money in this country, and that's how we've valued one another in a lot of ways. And so we're leaning into that space of those conversations about what does it feel like to be human and what does it feel like to have these conversations, because we don't have a lot of great role models for this. And to also be able to address those things that people don't talk about, that is that disenfranchised grief, the things that people don't see, which does happen with early onset dementia and a lot of illnesses where people, you don't know what's going on with someone, but we have to create that space so that it can come up. So that's really what we're wanting with the training and how it's different. So support groups really look different. And I think for me, what creates a lot of safety is to make sure that the environment doesn't feel competitive, but it feels collaborative, because we just automatically do comparisons that, ooh, their situation's much worse, than mine. So really, I can't speak up, and one of the biggest heartbreaks for me is people not accessing care and support because they feel like their problem's not big enough.
Very true. You said so many different things. I love the curiosity versus the judgment. I love the truth and the authenticity, creating that safe space to have real conversations, to allow people to feel, because we don't feel like we can show those things. And one of the things I'm sure you guys run across a lot is not every family gets along and is loving, and yet they're still there. And the family dynamics are all different. And those things have to be dealt with differently. And they have to be, like Bonnie said, even with the person with dementia, they still have to be validated no matter who the person is, because that's their reality. And how do you move through those things? The other thing that, to me, one of the differences that I see is that it's not an 8-week course. That's one of the things that I hear so often from people is, I don't want an 8-week grief course. I go to it, I feel better, it's over, and I go right back to where I was, and I got to start all over again. And what I've always heard with doulas is it can really be customized to what the needs are. Also, in terms of being able to be multifaceted, in terms of taking that Western medicine and Eastern medicine and legacy piece and educational piece and pulling it all together, instead of going, okay, now I made you an appointment for over here, and then don't forget Thursday you got to go here, and then they get stressed out. But to know there's one person, and I'm sure you all do it a little bit different, and not that you don't collaborate with others, but I think you take a lot of that heavy weight off, in terms of knowing there's one person I can really rely on and trust that knows everything. And am I misspeaking on that, Kathleen?
No, not at all. I was going to add, I think the empowerment part comes from learning skills, so that when you're in that situation that feels really stressful, when you're trying to talk to a medical team where there feels like there's this power differential or there's something else going on, is that you're really learning skills so you can self-regulate, so you can stay attuned to the person that's in need, and be able to provide care right then and there. And that when it doesn't work, that there might be another approach. So you can come back to our coaching. You can ask for more training. You can ask for more resources. There's lots of other people out there doing incredible work that we draw our education from. So just really being resourceful, so that you don't feel scared or that you've got it wrong. And I think that's the only thing I would add to, is that it's skill development too.
Okay. Great. Colleen, I'm going to go to you. And if you don't mind kind of explaining your certifications and things, and then we'll get into your questions as well.
Sure. So as I said before, I'm a registered nurse. I have an MSN, which is a Master's of Science in Nursing. And I also took 10 years out of nursing, decided, and it was because I was working at a geriatric psychiatric unit. It was really psychiatric medical unit and research Alzheimer's unit at UCLA. that I decided I wanted to take 10 years out and do something a little different in approach. And so I got a clinical doctorate in chiropractic and was more interested in mobility and wellness part of that career. And so I got that. And then, of course, as time went on, I got my end-of-life doula certification from the Conscious Dying Institute out of Boulder. And I also got a certification in conscious dying education, which people don't always understand. And what that really is helping that individual decide what priorities they have and how they want to die. And it may mean they would like the whole family there. It may mean they want a party. It may mean they want to have a living funeral before they die, have people, present while they're still living. It could mean they don't want a lot of people there. They only want a significant other there. I mean, it's all about how you want to die. Now, we all know things change, but if a person has plans and they have alternative, they feel more empowered. And so that's basically what that's about.
Wonderful. And I am glad you mentioned that living celebration, because that's something fairly new and not everyone's been invited to one of those, but they're really quite beautiful to be part of, and to also understand that privacy piece, that not everybody wants what you want or what you think everyone's supposed to want, and being able to allow that space for that. I wanted to ask you about life reviews and reminiscing. We're just hearing so much more about both of those things, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and different types of dementia. But in general, for our senior population, and I'm seeing it even starting at earlier stages, people starting to record their stories with the technology and things that we have access to. So can you talk about life review and reminiscing and how you utilize that?
Yeah, it is my passion. In my business, I actually have a section for life review and legacy projects. Life review and reminiscing are both considered psychosocial interventions, and a lot of times they're used synonymously together, and that's just fine. And I'll just give you the separate definitions of them, but they're used both, and I've used both. Reminiscing is a recall of an individual's memories from various periods in their life. And it's something that both of them are very organic in nature. I mean, if you try to do it in a logical sequence, it's really not always the way things go. But life review covers a wider range of memories and how they fit into the person's total life. And so the thing with both of them, and research will support this, it improves people's mental well-being, it decreases depression, it decreases anxiety, and increases self-esteem and self-worth. And it promotes social interaction, which is beautiful, especially with groups of people who have dementia, of the Alzheimer's type. I used to run, back in the 80s, reminiscing groups. And what I found, I had about maybe an average between 7 to 12 people in a group, and they usually ran for 45 minutes weekly. And what I found was, and they were men and women, and some had dementias and some didn't. They were, it was in assisted living or long-term care communities. And sometimes the men would talk about the war, but they wouldn't talk about specific experiences. They would talk about their experiences of location, like they were in Italy or they were in France, and what did that mean? And then food would always come up, the topic of food, baking, and the men would talk about the things they loved. And then they get into their families. The women would say, I cooked for this many, and it depends on their culture they were, part of. And so it was always exciting, but poetry was big. I had a gentleman bring in a book from the 1800s. He had poetry from the 1800s. And of course, we talked about 19th century poetry, Walt Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe and Thoreau and all of those. They would read poetry and reminisce over that. So research has shown that it's highly effective with Alzheimer's disease and improving quality of life. So doulas do play. We have this in our program. We have Legacy and Life Review, and September 19th, I'll be doing a webinar on Legacy and Life Review. So we really stress this, and doulas play a role because it can either be one-to-one, and you can bring in the family with this, because the family can also support the memory of the individual and get them involved with this. So it's I teach at Cancer Lifeline. I teach a class, and Life Review is part of that class. And what that helps people with is people who are facing terminal illness or serious illness can integrate the positive and the negatives in their life and and with this group, particularly these groups, it's unresolved conflicts or regrets, and they can get into that. And by the way, early stage dementia, you can work with these things with people before they advance further. So dementias, we know, disrupt the short-term memory process. And the nice thing about Life Review and reminiscing is it goes around that short-term storage, and you can access the remote. And what I have seen is the people don't have as much, what do I want to say, they don't have the same feelings of loss and frustration because they can access the remote and feel like they're part of life still. And that's where the positive self-image comes in, and the socialization. You feel like you're still part of something. So we do one other thing when you're doing either one-to-one with Life Review or reminiscing, you're using active listening. And in our program, we call that holding space. And that is the compassion. You're totally present for that individual, and you're not fixing things for them, and you're not making judgments, because we have non-judgment as part of being doulas. And because you can do that, you can kind of re-energize your clients, who we call them clients, because they feel like you really are there and you're there for them. So really, it's all about remembering, sharing, and reflecting. That's what I think these tools are used for. And there's so many. In Life Review, we even have reflection questions or a set of questions, and you can go through those. But like I say, it's very organic. The person may say they're not interested in doing Life Review, and before you know it, they're in it because they remember something that they want to talk about. So there's all kinds of things you can use, and I love the things that the Alzheimer's Association has, or other associations, with the baking cupboard, the magnetic picture boards that can help with people with Alzheimer's disease, and they see the tools that are used in baking, and it promotes their memories of when they used to bake. And the same thing with being a handyman. They have a magnetic board for that in building and things like that. So there's a lot of things and tools you can actually share with families to help their loved one. And the benefits just keep going on and on. And I think that's the most important thing about Life Review and reminiscing.
Wonderful. I'm just going to mention a couple other tools. I don't know if you're familiar with Nana's books, but they're like 8.5 by 11, big print. One side has just a picture, and then the other has few words. And what's nice is if someone is still able to read, it's short, they won't get lost in it. Or you can read it to them, or you can just focus and reminisce with the picture. So, I mean, you can use it a lot of different ways, and all ages can participate. And that's one of the things I like about Life Review and reminiscing, is it's educational for everybody, to be able to learn things and capture things. The other is just a tool that I created called Your Memory Chip Journal, and it's a companion tool to your memory chip. But the journal you can download on my site if you go to the free resources area. And it's just for family or friends to bring a picture and then write. It can be a few words, it can be a story, it can just say who's in the picture or what it was about, but to be able to leave it for others to continue to reminisce. Because I learned through my own experience, my mom had dementia for 30 years, my dad had brain cancer, and, going through both of their journeys, I learned stories I never heard of before that were, some of them were just downright hilarious, and they weren't going to tell us kids because, that's not how a parent's supposed to act, but that's how my parents acted, because they were young at one time too. And they were just really neat pieces to be able to see and hold and feel, that you didn't know before. Just that whole reminiscing and life review just broadens your picture of who that person was and is, in your life. And I think that that's really important. So thank you for sharing that, Colleen. Kathy, I'm going to go to you, and I'm going to have you again first start out with your titles and certifications and just explain those to people. And then I will get to your question as well.
Certainly. I am a social worker, but not an MSW. I've been in healthcare for a very long time, actually since 1975, when I started working with emotionally disturbed adolescents in a psychiatric setting, and then chemical dependency. And I have a bachelor's degree in criminology corrections. But my experience as a social worker started in 1994 in long-term skilled nursing settings. And I too worked with Bonnie. In fact, one of the most interesting folks that we had, we called them residents in that environment of the skilled nursing, was the gentleman who actually did the entire chapter of dementia, was actually a resident of mine there at that setting a long time ago. I also have certification in gerontology from University of Southern California, and I'm a geriatric mental health specialist with certification out of the University of Washington. I'm a hands-on person, so I've been in private practice for over 4 years, and currently I am working as a social worker in an adult day program. And many of the things and situations people have been mentioning, I'm helping folks cope with and providing what we call deep listening, holding space, and also providing a caregiver support group. And that caregiver support group is for loved ones who have dementia, who are attending the adult day program or from the community of which they live in.
Wonderful. Well, Kathy, I want to ask you, in terms of your impact with people living with dementia, can you share some examples of how you've worked with them?
Certainly. There is one particular, well, there's many stories. I have lots of different ones, but this particular story I felt was quite remarkable because she was a 69-year-old nurse. She and her family engaged with me in the very midst of COVID in July of 2020. And this gal had had Parkinson's for over 15 years. And she also had dementia, Alzheimer's type. And she was very clear of how she wanted her end-of-life journey to be and what she chose, even though some members of her family weren't keen on it, was to do VSED. And VSED is voluntary stop eating and drinking. This client of mine was actually a oncology neurology nurse. So intimately, she truly understood the dynamics and the projection and journey of progressive Parkinson's and dementia. When we started working, I started working with her and her family. Initially, it was with her. I would say she had probably mild to moderate stage because she was living in an adult family home, which is unique in itself that she wanted to begin this journey. But we started, just as Colleen talked about, with a life review. But first, I got to do an in-depth social history, which is so important because the more you know about an individual, the better you can help and guide and help them not navigate this journey. With the life review, and she was so clear about what she did and didn't want, but also another enormous piece of work that she wanted to do was unfinished business, because she was from a family of 5 siblings, Her mom was still alive, and she had discord with a couple of her family members. And one of the things that we were able to do is really drill down and focus about some of the feelings that she had. And that's where that deep listening really takes place. So much so that by the end of, before she made this decision to stop eating and drinking, she was really able to connect with the sister who happens to be, her name was Kathy, as well. And they had a difficult relationship for several years, but she was really able to show her emotions, talk about her emotions, but even then be able to talk with her sister. And what was the most unique situation is the sister was able to write this incredible, beautiful poem to my client. And it was such a healing experience. What was also unique about this situation is that the children of the client chose to have their mother taken out of the adult family home, and they rented an RV. They gutted the RV and had the RV parked in the daughter's park garage area, carport area. And so it was unique in that situation because it was by the house, but not in the house. And 3 generations of family members were able to become very involved. And one of the gifts of being an end-of-life doula is really listening deeply to what the person's needs are and what the caregiver's criteria. She had very specific things, like she didn't want any male caregivers, and she wanted to be bathed and every day. And there were so many different pieces of things that she wished. And we also had the opportunity to actually utilize vigil planning. And vigil planning is being at the bedside, who she wanted at the bedside, who she didn't want, whether she wanted to be turned every 2 to 3 hours so that she would not develop any kind of breakdown. But she was so clear, no hospitalizations, being comfortable. And she ended up having also 24-hour caregiver. What was unique during that time period is that the nurses and nursing assistants had not any knowledge about what an end-of-life doula was. So as well as my being present for my client and her families, it was also an education of the staff that was coming to also care. As you know, hospice Medicare doesn't provide that length of time, whereas an end-of-life doula can spend 2 to 3 hours at any session. And as the days got closer, she actually made a conscious decision that August 18th would be her last day of eating and drinking. And what touched my heart so much is that she chose that day because her daughter was a school teacher, and she wanted her daughter not to have to be burdened by caring for her when school started. It was really quite emotional. In my practice as a social worker, I've done thousands of care conferences, so I had the opportunity utilizing doing family care conferences, helping the children, grandchildren rather, of my client too, so that we could normalize the end-of-life process and what was taking place. Also, the very son that did not want to be present at end-of-life for his mother actually took his turn at being with his mom. And when he was sitting with her at 4 o'clock in the morning, she passed away. Thanks.
Okay. Well, what a beautiful story. You had me tearing up there. It was, the stories are powerful. I mean, they're so heartfelt. And like you said, when you all said you're in that space to honor them and honor their wishes and the thought that goes in to this whole process. There was also talk of, being able to resolve unresolved issues. And I think that happens on both sides of the coin, the person who's going to pass, but also family members. And I've heard of doulas doing just beautiful work in terms of, again, allowing people to work through that and try to figure out a resolution. And I'm sure it doesn't happen all the time, but from what I've heard, and I don't hear the stories near as much as you do, it seems like both sides typically want it resolved. It's just no one's kind of stepped forward, to do it. And am I mistaken on that? That's just been from the stories I've heard from kind of the collective as a whole.
For the most part, that's really true. There has been situations as an end-of-life doula where the parents had passed away, but the client actually didn't even want her siblings at bedside, nor to have her siblings be notified of her death. And that's the exception versus the rule.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I know we need to wrap up here, but I did want to ask each of you if you had one tip to give a family who's dealing with dementia, and it might be directed at the person diagnosed or their family members. What tip would that be in terms of dealing with loss? And Bonnie, I'm going to go to you first.
From my perspective, I think acknowledging the loss is really hard for people. But I think to go back and visit the memories and to learn to appreciate the person, who they were and who they are now. I think you have to remember that these were people that really meant something to you, and just because they have dementia and things have changed a little bit, they still have a life of meaning. And so I think that's one thing. And then just the other thing I would just say too, when you experience loss, I think you have to really lean into that loss and embrace it in order to get to the other side of it. So I think those would be my tips for that.
Great. Colleen, how about you?
Well, somewhat along a line with what Bonnie was saying, to allow for emotions. Let if you feel like this is a loss, no matter what, and to allow to cry and to feel, and to journal. Journaling, I've talked to several people who like to journal their feelings about it, and later they're able to talk about it more as well.
Wonderful. I know Kathleen, who had to drop off, she said her tip would be to slow down, to be kind and be loving. There's no agenda to what you're going through, and just take it a day at a time and find one safe person or place or pet to rest in. And I thought that was just beautiful, because grief takes energy, and we need permission to be able to feel it, and nobody processes this the same fashion, and to be able to release judgment on that. Kathy, how about you? Any tip you'd like to share?
I think one of the things that I share with folks is that the person with dementia is our guide, and to encourage that unfolding of the journey. They're going to be teaching us, and we learn something every single time when we have interactions with folks. And I guess the other thing is to acknowledge that a person with dementia, their feelings as they move towards end of life is some of the most powerful part of them as well, and to listen to that.
Exactly. Good advice. Well, in wrapping up, I just want to thank each and every one of you for your insights, your advice, and your passion to be doing the work you're doing. The passion and compassion is so necessary, especially in the world we're living in today. I think it's a missing link on a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. And what people can learn through this journey is something that they can take with through the rest of their life journey and apply some of these skills too. So again, thank you all for participating. And for our listeners, I'd like to ask you to be a giver of hope. Take a second and just be that giver of hope. Like, click, and share this episode with your sphere of influence. You don't know who in your sphere is dealing with things like this. And, yes, we're focused on dementia, but it's so much bigger than dementia. End-of-life doulas are really about living life well and wrapping it up and putting a bow on it at the end. That's kind of how I look at the work that you guys do. And just who doesn't want to have someone who really gets you and listens to you and has an authentic response and who validates who you are and what you're feeling? Everybody needs that. That's called belonging. And I think in society today, it's again one of those missing links. And we need to learn to be kinder. We need to slow down. We need to listen. And so, again, be a giver of hope. Pass this information along. You can go to the ladies' website, which is the Gentle Passage Doula Collective.com. They are also on LinkedIn. They have a Facebook page. And then there's another link to their TV show that they do, a different kind of doula. And so check that out too, because they do some interesting interviews. I know I'll be honored to be one of their guests coming up here soon as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, please feel free to like, click, and share, comment. We would love to hear your thoughts on the Gentle Passage Doula Collective and the work that they're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.